Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Rick Wilson. Welcome to Dragonproof. You know, the purpose of this podcast is ostensibly to help entrepreneurs and leaders in business in a variety of aspects. Fundamentally, the idea of dragons and how to dragon-proof your business is about managing and thriving in a world of unforeseen and unknown challenges. And sometimes it's a specific company like Amazon. Sometimes it's a global pandemic like COVID. And you have to be prepared for them all the time, almost like a special forces troop. And so, you know, we're here to wrap up the last month that I did. I'm home, and we're here to wrap up the last month that I did on the road. And the trip was like a spring training for me. You know, really, I am a baseball fan, so I like baseball analogies. And we're coming into a phase for, especially for people in e-commerce, that the next several months are going to be extremely intense, and they're going to require our A game without question. You know, regardless of your political views, the election is going to be a game changer one way or another. COVID is here to stay, and you know the impact COVID's having on all of us and our businesses is ever evolving. But COVID is not going to just disappear. And then for e-commerce companies, we're coming into our most pivotal time of our business, at least for most of us, the holiday shopping season. And you know, I know what we've been seeing on our side with how high GMV, which is total sales amongst our merchants, has stayed all year. I can only imagine what it's going to look like in Q4. And so I've learned some valuable lessons on the road. I feel really great and ready for what's next, and I want to pass that on. So today, to wrap up the experience and break down 5 key areas that I've been working with, I'm inviting Chris, my podcast producer, who you've gotten to know and love during this series, to talk about it with me. So Chris, welcome.
Hey, Rick. So you are really back now, yeah? We're done?
Yeah. I'm at home. I'm planning on going back out to like Zion or something for a brief jaunt in November, but the experiment is complete, and I have learned lessons.
Yes. I can see you via Zoom, and you look wiser than I remember. So
someone called me Zen over the weekend, which I thought was kind of funny. They're like, "You seem so Zen now."
Yeah, well, that's definitely going to be helpful, what we're talking about today. So how long were you out there? You're out there about a month?
Yeah,
Roughly?
just under. Yeah, roughly.
And how long do you think you could do that? Like, how viable is that as some kind of long-term lifestyle?
You know, before it actually I could have probably gone 2 months before I would be anxious to get home. Part of that though was having my dogs. You know, my dogs actually turned out to be awesome road dogs, but you know, you have to be a little more regimented when you've got dogs in an RV. So there was a little bit of that, and eventually, you know, it is nice to be able to spread back out into a home versus you know, I don't know how many square feet the inside of my RV is, but not large, right? Smaller than a small studio. So, but I could have done that for 2 weeks, especially with the lessons I learned on how to do it.
Yeah.
2 months. I'm sorry, 2 months.
So, I mean, when you're out there, you must be looking back at Miva also from out there. So thinking about this same subject of working remotely in these new ways that we're all doing this year, like, what's your take looking back, like at Miva from being out there? Like, what's a grade that you would give it on how it's going with work from home overall?
So I would give it an A, both the concept of work from home and Miva, but that's not an unqualified A that you know, that it's just, you know, rainbows and kittens. It is there are challenges, and it depends on a combination of your role within a company or within Miva specifically, and there are also challenges depending on your circumstances. You know, I don't have to do distance learning with my dogs. If I was married with young children in distance learning, you know, I think that makes work from home harder, but simultaneously you almost have to work from home because of the distance learning thing. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge currently in the work from home world. And we've definitely seen that within our employee base, that about half of them want an office to go to sometimes. And so, you know, we are, I still think we're about a year and 4 or 5 months from that. But that is what we're aiming at in the future, is creating little co-work spaces of our own, not like a shared space like a WeWork, that we build out and let people just, when they want to, schedule an office, grab their laptop and go in. You know, and we still have some employees, depending on your department, who are on desktops, and we had them take them home. So, you know, we have some internal stuff we got to clean up as we complete the transition to this new world. But all in all, I would call the work from home thing an A. I was able to effectively seamlessly work with my staff on the road, once I got out of my own way, if you will.
So there aren't any major drawbacks at all?
The most major drawbacks were really, one was it totally of my own making, which was, and I was glad I did the trip because it helps suss this out. You need to pre-plan if you're really going to not just work from home, but if you're going to go on the road, you need to pre-plan, right? If you're driving throughout the day in an RV, all you end up doing is work. You end up answering emails and chats early in the morning before you drive, and then late in the afternoon or at night. So it's kind of like being a road warrior. And I know from being a road warrior early in my career, that is okay for keeping things from spinning, from getting wildly off base, but that's not highly productive. What you need to do is have a plan. So if I was going to go do another, say, month, I'd probably pick 4 cities, and I would travel to a city on a weekend, get set up at an RV park for a week, and then stay for a week, and then travel to a new city, etc. Do it 4 times before I got home. And if you're set and you can kind of create a little remote home, then it works great. And the only other thing, which we have talked about in the past, that was critical is just ensuring you have high quality internet. But that's a given at home, let alone on the road.
In your case, the RV itself, is sort of the technology that you used, to go do this thing. You needed some kind of a system, in order to make it possible.
Yeah, and I found, the one thing, and this is really a COVID specific thing, but the RV was really great. And this podcast is not about RVs; it's just about thinking and analyzing from a business perspective. But the RV was really great because it was its own quarantine bubble, right? So in a world of non-quarantine, the need to go on the road to get your head clear would be less. But we did stay in a hotel for a couple nights, and the RV turned out to be much easier and much more functional because I had set my work office up in the RV. It was at my little dinette. And that was probably a key lesson for how to be effective at this is most people work out of some form of habit. And so once I got my laptop set up and my little notebook that I take notes in set up, and I knew my internet was working, then all I had to do was sit down at my dinette and start working. And it was no different than what I'm doing right now here with you.
Totally. And I mean, it sounds like something that could apply to more than just being on an RV trip.
Yeah, right? Look,
just adapting to this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the real Dragonproof point of this first bullet that we're talking about of remote work is if you have a system in place, if you set up a system, and part of even building a system is going out and doing it wrong for a little while to figure it out, which was the goal of this trip. If you have a system in place, you can protect yourself from unforeseen threats, right? And that's the idea. And as we're going into Q4 with both COVID and the election and what is likely to be a banner year for e-commerce. I mean, if it's not, something's really wrong, but hey, it's 2020. This is where you want to really streamline stuff. You want to make sure your systems work. You want to make sure that you can log in from anywhere. And this isn't just about being in an RV. Of course, this is, if logging in from anywhere and making, and we use there's 2 ways to log in from anywhere. There's one where you don't have any security, which I do not recommend. And there's one in which you actually use dual factor systems like Duo and VPNs, and everything you do is no different than if you're on the network. And those things can allow you to protect your business, be nimble. And, when you are on the road and not, one of the things I've learned just from work from home in the last 6 months is when you're not face to face with people, you're forced to systematize things, which I think is a critical Dragonproof concept.
What do you mean by that? Forced to systemize things?
Yeah, there's a lot of systems. There's a lot of things that can happen when everyone's sitting in an office and I'm like, hey, Jeff, I need you to fix this thing on the website is not a system, right? That's me sitting at my desk, noticing that there's some little problem on the website and meandering over to my webmaster and asking him to fix something. That's not a system. A system is documenting the thing I saw, submitting, for lack of a better term, a ticket to Jeff, even if that ticket is just in the form of an email, and having a follow-up process to make sure it gets completed. So you don't need to over-engineer these things. You don't need to buy Salesforce just to tell your webmaster to update something on your website. But you do want to focus on, I want to be able to if there's something I need done that my staff is going to assist with, I want to be able to send that in a consistent method and have a process for ensuring it gets completed. And that, it's easy to not do that stuff when you're sitting in an office, because again, you can just yell out your office or walk over to someone's desk and get it done. And the work from home stuff, the systems actually streamline the business and help protect you and grow in the future.
Well, one thing that is sort of hard to systemize in the way you're talking about is interacting with clients and your customers. And I'm wondering how much interaction you had with people who are your customers, like while you were out on this trip.
So, I don't know if the trip changed that much for my particular role. My interaction with customers it's primarily from, since MivaCon went virtual this year, it's primarily from, I would argue, two other sources. So normally a lot of my interaction with customers is via MivaCon, then it's email, and then we have our forums where people have ongoing dialogues, and so the forums were no different on the road than they were at the office. Email's no different on the road than it was from the office. But I think for Miva as a company, as opposed to me, our account managers who have ongoing, dedicated communication with our clients, as opposed to, say, reactive communication with our clients like I have, or our tech support, what we call TAC, Technical Assistance Center, they as well. So in both cases, they use, although different systems, variations on ticketing systems, right? So you systematize those communications by having a tracking mechanism and making sure you follow up. Now that's personal communications. On top of that, you can have automated communications that go to your clients, whether it's newsletters, updates, reminders. We've all gotten used to the kind of automated email sequences, but I think it's more important, or as important, to systematize how you personally contact clients as well.
And obviously in 2020, we're assuming that the people that we're talking to are kind of all going through the same things that we're going through too.
Yeah, both, that's kind of the point of the podcast, is there's an underlying assumption there that while the things that I'm doing aren't exactly one-to-one overlapping with what my clients are doing, if you expand that lens just a hair, it's easy to apply the things I'm discussing and sharing to a broader sense of business equations. And my goal is never to tell someone, here's, wake up tomorrow at 9 a.m. and twiddle your thumbs this way and your business will be magical. My goal is always to spur thought and brainstorming so that they can find the right Dragonproof solutions for their business.
These systems always are about coordinating lots of different people for lots of different tasks. But I feel like one of the big themes of your trip from this last month was really about being self-sufficient and about having all your ducks in a row and all of your needs managed from within. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's fairly accurate. I think that goes back to the system stuff, right? Self-sufficiency is a bit of a misnomer in the world, especially in our interconnected world and the way our businesses work today. But self-sufficient in the sense that I can run my business without having to call IT all the time and get stuff handled. I can run my business. I can run my portion of my business, essentially my personal duties, without intervention from another party. And that's what I would define as self-sufficient in this case.
So overall, what's your assessment? How has it been working out, this idea of systematizing your communication with clients?
I think it's been working really well. The biggest challenge I see in that process, and this is one of those age-old software and business challenges, is in a perfect world, this would all exist in one meta system, right? I would log into Salesforce or something, and I could do everything. And that's a Shangri-La that I'm never sure is going to exist. I do think that the closest you can get to that, and I think that's something that is working and being constantly developed, is this world of APIs where things plug into each other, because your e-commerce store, Salesforce has its own e-commerce platform, but it's not a one-size-fits-all product. They're working on a warehouse management system, but they acknowledge it's not a one-size-fits-all product. And so really you want APIs to connect these systems. We want to be able to use Jira for sprint planning and Git for source code repository and 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 I want to be able to use Slack and Zoom, and so you have all these products that are always going to be disparate. And as opposed to assuming we're going to have one meta product, I think the more Dragonproof angle on this is sort of nimble integration via API, so that your world, so that I can essentially skin my own process for working, and you can skin your own process for working, and we can collaborate together and still have access to the same information.
So has that really been your way to approach resource management this year, like employing these ultra specialized tools for each tiny part of the task?
Yeah, in many ways, and I think you know this year was certainly this year, if anything, from a company standpoint, has been a test in being nimble and clever, right? And so everything from what we had budgeted for to what we had planned for. How do you do performance reviews? How do you manage employees remotely, right? I have actively promoted within both on this podcast and within the company that we're a remote first company, that unless otherwise told, like say you have a schedule where you have to be on the phones for a certain time, unless otherwise told, you have the right to effectively set your schedule. You have to show up for the meetings you've agreed to. You've got to, if you're available for phone calls, that stuff. But it's okay if at 3:00 you want to go for a run, and then after dinner you're gonna clean up whatever you hadn't finished yet. That stuff's okay. And I think really what that's forced us to do is rethink everything from how do you manage budgets, how do you manage performance reviews, what systems you can tie into, and this is one of those ongoing processes of never-ending improvement. But for Miva, it's been we've had a great year. We got version 10 out the door. Our development team did not miss a beat. There was some minor challenges in suddenly your director of QA has internet problems at home, 2 days before launch. What do you do? Things like that. But those things could happen at the office. The internet could have gone down at the office 2 days before. It wasn't that long ago that San Diego had a giant power outage, and I had 75 people back then sitting around unable to do anything. So you manage those things and by being nimble. So I'm kind of rambling, so I'll let you step back in.
Well, is that all sort of a dry run training for the intensity that's coming for Miva specifically for holiday 2020?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a very busy time, obviously, like at Miva, right? Can you talk about that for a sec?
Sure. And so it depends on department. So our development department that built Miva 10, so to speak, their world rarely slows way down. Their world's pretty consistent, but they turned on the jets, if you will, the final month of product release. People working 12, 13, 14-hour days. And sometimes that's lore in the world of tech, but that's not how I run Miva. I don't like people burning themselves out. But they'll have a pretty consistent Q4, unless we find some huge issue with the software. Their Q4 should be pretty normal. But for the rest of the company, at least for our professional services, customer success, and tech support teams, and our marketing team, and our sales team, which now I've covered about 75% of the company, they're coming into what's going to absolutely be the busiest quarter of the year. And I think that being nimble has been that. And I keep using the word nimble, but let me jump into something. If you're doing development, or if you're doing website development, using things like sprint planning, where every week or every 2 weeks, the team who's course correcting, if you will, sits down and recorrects your course. It's like that old adage about flying to the moon. You've seen speakers draw this, I'm sure, on a whiteboard somewhere. You don't fly to the moon in a straight line. You fly to the moon in a very crooked line, but your spacecraft is constantly recalibrating you toward that moon. And that's what these systems should do for your business.
You look and sound really good. We don't have any video on this thing, but I'm just noting, you sound pretty terrific. And I'm just wondering what grade you'd give yourself. And we're talking about all these systems, but what about your personal systems? Like, where are you at physically and mentally at the end of this trip versus at the start?
Oh gosh, it feels like night and day different. So I felt, from an analogy standpoint, if you remember, I can't remember what Olympics it was, maybe 2008 or 2012. And it was actually a heroic feat. And I'm not calling myself a hero, but there was a marathon runner who had just left it all on the mat, and they crawled over the finish line of the marathon at the Olympics. And it was a really tear-jerking moment, but they had nothing left to give, right? And that is some level how I felt before the beginning of this trip. I was physically drained. I was having a hard time motivating for any kind of exercise. I was approaching a type of rock bottom from a vitality standpoint, and I knew full well that not only was it going into Q4, not only was Miva about to have its biggest product release ever, and we're now knee deep into 2021 planning. This is going to accelerate next year, not decelerate. So the trip was a huge help in self-care. And it started by just getting me out of the house, which was a mental health boost. I remember literally just the end of the first day driving for 12 hours, which I was exhausted from the drive, but I just remember being so joyous, like, holy shit, I'm finally out of my house. And so it can be really simple stuff, like just leaving. And that could be, where you live. I think everywhere in America, no matter where you live, or everywhere in the world for that matter, there is something joyous to see nearby, whether it's the beach or a forest or a desert or a mountain or snow or whatever it can be. But go out and see those things because they help mentally reset you. And so post trip, I'm back to exercising. I'm moving, and it's funny, just even simple things like light exercise. And then, it's almost like a drug. You come off that with such a high, you're just exhilarated. And I think when I walked into shelter in place pandemic in March, I took an attitude that was sort of like hunker down and just let this storm pass. And the evolution of that over the last 6 months, concluding with this trip, was this storm is permanent. So how do I reset myself to live in this world?
So given that, given how you were feeling before and given what you're preparing for, it's really not an extravagance, right? That to go and have an experience like this.
No, not at all. Now, like I'm 6'6" and I'm a big guy. I'm 6'6" and 290-ish pounds. I'm not necessarily fit for car camping. There's not many cars big enough that I can fold down the seats and throw a sleeping bag in. But it could be something as simple as car camping for your average person. And I meant physically average. I'm like a gentle giant. But that was not an extravagance. It was taking available resources and applying it as leverage for my own physical and mental well-being, so that I could increase it was like a version of a flywheel. If I have my mental health going, and then I get my physical, I use that to springboard into my physical health, and then that causes my vitality to go up, and that causes me to be a better CEO of Miva and host of this podcast. And you just keep getting into this virtuous circle where things are improving.
So it's almost like we talk a lot about being prudent in your planning and decision-making process. So it's almost like going on this trip was like a prudent move, right?
Yeah, I have kind of a funny story. So, Miva 10 was an interesting launch. It always is. And I would call it extremely successful. I think we have about 25% of our customer base upgraded already. And generally speaking, it takes about 3 months for our customers to upgrade. And someone on the forums who had been listening to this podcast kind of blasted me because they tried to upgrade and they had some bumps in the road, and we had to step in and help them, which is what we're here for. And they're like, well, and you're just romping around in an RV, why couldn't you have timed this better? And I was like, look, first of all, that shows a lack of understanding of how this all works. I'm not sitting there pushing, pieces of code into your computer. There's a team that does that stuff, right? And there's a system for it. And I have authorized the launch of software from 35,000 feet in the sky, from my home office, from my work office, and now from an RV. And those things, they had nothing to do with each other, right? And my team was able to respond to that person's needs in the same amount of speed as they would always, regardless of my particular physical whereabouts. And so it was funny. This was definitely not an extravagance. This was a prudent move for my own self and for the company.
What is the feedback you're getting about podcasting in general when you're on the forums?
I don't get a ton of direct feedback on the forums, but some. And then what I get what I get randomly is I'll get emails. So a specific episode will strike someone, and they'll want to thank me for it. And then actually the most common feedback I get is just talking to people. I do a fair amount of just checking in and chatting with people. And oftentimes, this happens at this point multiple times per month. Someone will just kind of drop out of nowhere. Hey, yeah, I really listen to the podcast a lot, and it does this, whatever, insert beneficial thing. It gives me wisdom, or it makes me calm, or I've received a variety of, I guess, compliments, if you will, about them liking the podcast.
And did you enjoy doing this while you were mobile? Did it give you something good?
Yeah, totally. I would say that, when we dug in this year, technically the podcast launched last year. They were getting hard to schedule because we were trying to videotape them, and so we really stripped down the process, which was kind of a 2020 thing as well. We did that even before pandemic hit, and because the idea was I needed to start creating a lot more content to be any good at this, right? I mean, it's sort of a Malcolm Gladwell thing. You're not going to put out 5 episodes of a podcast and suddenly, be a great podcaster or broadcaster. So my goal was really just to get on the mic every week and work this out. And we had come into a format, as you know, where we had guests and we had topics. And so this was interesting because there was no particular topic, and you were my interviewee guest, but we got away from our previous format, and purposefully so, just to see what it was like. And that doesn't mean the old format won't return. That doesn't mean it was bad. It just means that we wanted to continue experimenting and being nimble.
It's an interesting way to talk to the people that you work with, isn't it? They're just kind of broadcasting into the ether, and sometimes it gets personal. Sometimes it's more about business, but is this nonstop, free-flowing like form of communication coming out?
Yeah, it is interesting. It's, in fact, I don't know, this might be something for me to talk to my therapist about, but I've found that it's sometimes much easier to get very personal on here, right? Because I'm just looking at you on Zoom, talking into a microphone on my computer, and no different than you and I having a personal telephone conversation. I can be vulnerable and intimate, and I don't get hung up. It's not like, I might shed a tear or a laugh or joke about my dogs. But if I was standing on a stage at the Super Bowl, the anxiety of that would probably preclude my ability to be that open. And so podcasting is a very interesting tool. And I really hope people are enjoying it, because I know it's been cathartic and helpful for me.
Do you recommend that people that you work with, your clients and customers, do something like this?
Yeah. I mean, this is a term from the .com boom that didn't survive, but it's, the idea of essentially a narrowcast, right? Even our thing is someday is effectively a narrowcast. There's a fairly wide audience of people who care about business and e-commerce or technology related businesses. But, I didn't set out to become Malcolm Gladwell or Howard Stern or anything else like that. I'm not expecting some broad audience of listeners. And I think you can focus that on your business. If you sell fasteners, and there's never been a business that I've ever met that if I was having dinner or a drink with the owner, that I couldn't find really fascinating things out about their business by just asking some questions. And whatever that is for your business is a worthwhile podcast.
And we're going to be cranking them out as we head into this coming season. What are some of the things that you want to talk about on the show?
So yeah, kind of like I was just saying a second ago, this experiment was great, and it gave me a lot. It gave me a lot of vitality and re-energized myself. Excuse me. But I want to get back into Q4 with a focus on e-commerce business. We're going to get back to having some guests, and really how to take the macro environment that we're all living in and how to use it to succeed more in this coming Q4 and into 2021 with all the things we've learned in this transformative year of 2020.
Well, I look forward to hearing what you come up with.
Thanks.
I'll be here to record it. So just another quick housekeeping note, letting everyone know we are up and running on Twitter over at Dragonproof Pod, all one word. Come check it out.
I followed us last week.
Thank you for following. Thanks for the ad. Appreciate it. Free set of snake knives for anybody who follows in the next 30 minutes. Anyway, thanks for checking in. Thanks for taking us on this little road journey with you, Rick. And we'll be back next week with more e-commerce goodness. Yeah.
Yep. We will be back next week. If you have any recommendations for guests, and I'm talking to the listeners right now, please either tweet us with those recommendations or some other way contact us, because we're always looking for good guest content or suggestions. It's easy for me to only invite the people I think of, and I'd rather have a broader audience. And as always, great talking to you guys. We'll talk to you next week.